Hi guys, Squirrel here and welcome to an episode of Derail Valley Simulator. Now, the game is finally out. Derail Valley Sim got released at the end of June as they promised, and I'm sure you've all been enjoying playing the game since. However, since they did change the way that power is delivered and the way that locomotives operate, things aren't quite the same. Back over at the Derail Valley wiki, people are struggling to understand what the capabilities of the various locos are now in Derail Valley Simulator, so I thought we'd do a little bit of testing today and see what we can do with the DE2. I would welcome your comments afterwards on the video, what your experiences are with the DE2, but you know, we're going to do some of our own testing and see what this thing can haul out of the harbour. So let's get started. Okay, so let's have a quick look at what the setup is. We have our locomotive, our DE2. It weighs 38 metric tons, 38,000 kilograms, 38 tons. We then have a series of cars. Each car I've set up here weighs 19 tons, and inside there's crude oil with 26 tons for a total of 45 tons. So 45 tons per car. And in this test, what I've done is I've stuck 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 cars weighing 45 tons. Mental math says that's 360 tons plus the locomotive itself at 38 tons for a grand total of 398 tons. Now, with all things load testing, it's a little bit tricky in Derail Valley because we don't have a test area. We don't have like specific straight testing lines of 1%, 2%, 3%, anything that we can actually tackle and get some serious testing done. But what we do have, well, the community made a gradient map. I'm just going to quickly show you that. So that's our current gradient map, and I checked with the developer, and apparently it's still pretty accurate to what we're currently experiencing in Derail Valley Simulator. The map itself didn't really get changed. So you can see down at the harbour town, obviously the harbour you can go west and you can go east. Now the reason I've chosen the harbour town is it's quite a common haul point to and from, specifically from, and the D2, despite being a shunter, and very good shunter, it's used quite a lot in the early game, you know, to get a lot of jobs done pretty cheaply, and you do find yourself coming down to the harbour quite frequently. So if you look at that map, you can see that if you head eastbound out of the harbour, which is that way, it's a bit messy. You get a 1.4% gradient, followed by a 2.3, followed by a 1.9, and then it levels out to a 0.9, then a 0. Going out east is not for the faint-hearted. It's just a solid climb all the way. However, going west, which is this direction, is a bit different, and that is quite a common run going out west. If I just quickly show you the main map, going out of harbour is quite a common run because you find yourself going up to the steel mill and up to all the other points in and out of the harbour. So this is a very common route to take. And looking at the gradient map, you can see what you end up facing initially is, well, it's actually a 1.4% gradient here, followed by a 2.4, and then it kind of levels out and then goes up to a 1.4, 1.5 again, and then it gradually levels out. So let's see. I'm going to start here, which is kind of where the track joins on the map, I guess, itself. Let's get rid of that map for you. What it actually joins on the harbour. If I bring up the harbour map, there we go. We are actually about here on the harbour map, so just before the sea yard, just, you know, either side of the sea and the D yard is where we are. Thought we'd pick this as a starting point. Now, we can't go more than 40 k's or so around that initial bend before the climb, so that's going to be our objective, is to get our speed up as much as possible. And this is the other thing about, you know, hauling and gradients. There's a lot of variables here. Momentum is a big thing for more than one reason. So this is not a scientific test in quotes, but this is like a real world, you know, what can we do if we push this thing to its limit? Bear in mind, I am controlling the weather right now. It's the midday sun, it's dry, the track is dry, it's perfect conditions. You know, back in your physics class, we'll assume, you know, no friction and a temperature of 21 Celsius. It's literally that. It's perfect conditions. If it rains, if it's wet, everything changes. So let's see what we can do. We're going to haul out of here with 8 cars, a total of 398 tons. Can we get out of that big gradient? Let's find out. Okay, let's get myself sat down. We shall remove the brakes. brake pipe pressure is coming down there. There's the brakes, the red one, and then we'll start to apply some power. Now, what I want to achieve is I want to try and get to 40 Ks as quickly as I can and then hold it at 40 Ks. What you're going to find is that the temperature will obviously very quickly start to rise as we make the initial pull. An important thing, as I've said before, is momentum. Speed is key. Not just because it gives you more momentum to carry on up the hill, but also the faster you're going, the more cooling you're getting on the engine and on the traction motors. So as you get quicker, the cooling becomes better. As you start to slow down up a gradient, it's a double-edged sword, because not only are you losing speed and momentum, but you're actually losing cooling as well, so it very quickly gets out of control. If you can get more speed before the hill, that's going to be, it's going to help you a lot to get up the gradient. So here we go. I'm going to start bringing up the power. Now, the temperature of the traction motors, I need to keep on the limit as best as possible. You can only go into the red for so much time before you start causing some damage. And when it comes to the amperage, if I can keep that at between 400 and 600, sometimes I'll dip into the yellow. It doesn't matter so much about going into the yellow on the amps. It's the temperature that really matters. So I'm going to try and get as much speed as I can here. Give it some welly. Like I say, I'm looking for 40 Ks. I know there's a bend halfway up the hill that's 40 K limit, and the first bend before the slope is a 40 K limit. But I'm going to have to back off because we're about to hit the red, you see, and then you'll start to see smoke coming out the engine. So yeah, I'm going to take it to the limit as much as I can, try and get as much speed as I can and see how far we can get. The initial slope, 1.4%, but then you make a left turn and then you're up at 2.4%, and that usually is the killer. Come on, let's push it as much as we can. There we go. Keep the juice going. Back off because there's the smoke. You can push it into the smoky area, but obviously you're going to cause engine wear and tear, so I'm trying not to do that. I'm trying to keep it kind of practical as best as I can, whilst pushing it as much as I can. Now what we're going to find is, as we hit this gradient now, which is the 1.4%, this gradient here, we'll have to start backing off to keep that under the red. But I'm going to try and push it as much as I can. Right, we're on the 1.4. Front of the trains hit the climb, back of the train start to take the climb. We'll lose some momentum. Holding out at the moment. Hit the red zone, we're going to have to back off at the notch. This is the turn. After this turn, it becomes 2.4%. Notice I can't put any more throttle in now because there's too much load on the traction motors, because the entire train is now at 1.4%. There's the turn. Bit of smoke coming out. We'll just leave it and push it a little bit more. Okay, I'll back off now. I don't want the fuse going on the traction motor. The longer we leave it in here, the more chance the traction motor fuse goes, and also the more chance that we cause a lot of damage to the... we're going to have to pay a bill, basically, at the end of it all. So there we go. Are we going to make it? It's touch and go right now. We're losing speed, so we're losing cooling. We're on a 2.4%. I'm going to have to back off one more time. It's close. It's really close. This is on the limit of the DE2 right now. It's actually on the limit. No. It's getting too hot now. And there's no way we're ever going to hill start this. So yeah, we're literally burning the motors. Yeah, that's done. So we've lost all cooling because momentum's gone. So there you go. With 8 cars, almost 400 tons. We did a 1.4% gradient. We hit the gradients at about 40 Ks, if I remember. And the 2.4, we couldn't quite make it. Now, the other problem is, after this, it flattens and then it carries on climbing up a 1.4. Much longer than that one. So, that is not really doable. Or is it? Is there another way around this? Right, I've taken the train, DE2, 8 cars full of oil, and we've pushed it a bit further back. So we're now in the loading yard, rather than down there. And what that's going to let us do is build up a bit more momentum on our way up this hill. Momentum is absolutely critical. It's also going to give us some options to just allow the traction motors to cool a little bit just before we push them hard for that climb, and that should make a big difference, but we're going to find out. Okay, so I'm keeping everything maxed out until I've got everything up to speed where I want it to be. We've got a 40k right turn just before that climb. I'd like to get to about 45 and then back off, give the traction motors a chance to cool, and then once the back of the train has gone around that 40 limit, punch it and try and get some extra headroom just before we hit that big slope. That's the plan, but we'll see what we can do. One of the problems with picking a load in Derail Valley is quite literally, you know, it's not just about what the locomotive is capable of, or its rating, which is already a little bit grey at the moment after Derail Valley Sim, but it's also the situation, like, where is it you're hauling? Is it a long sustained climb of a certain gradient, or is it kind of a steep gradient with no run-up? You know, is it short, is it long, does it have a run-up, does it not? Is it wet outside or is it dry? There's so many variables to consider, and sometimes you might just have to wait the weather out just so you can make the climb, which was completely an alien thing before Derail Valley Sim. We never had that problem. But what I'm interested in doing is trying to find out just what are the capabilities of these locomotives now, so that when I'm picking a job, I've got a clue, I've got something to base it on. We know that this whole train is the best part of 400 tons. And down at the harbour, we've got this kind of run-up possibility. And we can take advantage of that, and I think you'll find it makes a big difference, but we're going to find out in a second. Okay, so I'm pushing it. I want to get to 45 if I can. Now I've got an option here. I can cool the traction motors down by backing off, or I can keep the speed going. I'm going to do a mixture of both. I'm just going to back off, keep the speed at 45. We're going to lose a bit to friction. Building up too much speed there, so I'll back off a bit more. We are risking a derail if we push it too much. I want the back of the train to be around that bend as best as possible, and then I want to really just give it some welly now. And we've got a lot more headroom this time. So now we're hitting nearly 50 before the slope, which is going to pay us dividends in a minute. We don't need to back off until we hit the red. I don't think the 40 speed limit's going to be a problem coming up, but we'll see. Okay, so traction motors are about to go red. Back off a notch. Okay, so that's fairly sustainable on this 1.4 gradient. Just flashing in the red a touch as we make the bend. Now we hit the steep climb. We're going to have to back off another notch. Now this is where the momentum really pays dividends, because this steep bit here is going to kill our traction motors. But the extra momentum should hopefully get us over this ridge. There you go, so the heat's coming up, so we have to back off again. And again. And probably again. No, stabilising. Okay, so now we're levelling out, you see. So there we go. So that extra run-up, that extra, what was it, 200 metres maybe? That extra run-up gave us all we needed just to make it over that lip, getting out of the harbour. But now we face another problem. We've now got, if you look at the gradient map, we've now got another 1.4, 1.5 climb, and we're only doing 20. And our motors are pretty hot, so we need to get the power back on. And this is a much longer climb than that 1.4 back there. This just goes on for a long time. And this is the issue with the harbour. You make it over that bit, and now you've got this bit. Look, 1.5 it says here. The map says 1.4. I think it says 1.4. No, it says 1.5. My bad. So it's a 1.5, so it's slightly more than that 1.4 back there. But it's much longer. So, you know, realistically, I don't think this is going to happen. We'll see what happens, but I don't think it's going to happen. As we slow down, the cooling slows down, and now we're getting to the vicious circle. You can see where we are. Like, we're not far away. We're not massive distance away from making it. At the moment, it's sustainable. But it can very quickly break down. If I back off on that throttle, which I'm going to have to, the cooling slows down, and now we start to just decelerate. And the longer this goes on, the more impossible it becomes. It only flattens out to 0.9 as it crosses over the river. So yeah, you get the point, right? However, if you actually look at the map for Harbour, there's another two options that you've got available to you. One of which you may not have ever considered, but we'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, I've got to back off now. I don't think we're going to make it. We're perilously close to the 0.9. But I am just risking the traction motors. You know, you could haul up here and try and do a hill start, but it's pretty tricky. If we had a bit more momentum, we could have got up there. And that's what the interesting thing, because if you actually look at the map, you'll find that you do have an option. If you look at this, where it says 2.4 coming out of the harbour, and then we did the 1.5, there's actually a 0 on the south side. You see that southern route there? That southern route, you can follow it south and go 0, 0, 0.7, 0, 0.6. You can actually take a much longer, slower route, but it's a lot flatter. And that's an option you may not have considered before. You can still get to the steel mill, it's just a longer way. The other thing is, because there is a 0 below that 2.4, we also have the option of a run up there. So let's move the train back to there. You know, if we basically reversed it back over that bridge, we can then get a run up on this. Alright, so there's the harbour. That's where we just climbed up there. And the track, actually, as I said, the track is a triangle here, and that's the south road that I mentioned, which is the other way to get to the steel mill. If you reverse back here, this bit here is actually quite flat, as I said on the map there, and that's where we are. We're a little bit further back. So imagine you'd done that big climb, then you tried to do that 1.5 gradient, and you didn't quite make it. Well, just allow it to reverse back, but reverse back over this side of the track. Let's get this thing into forward, release the brakes. Reverse back down this side of the track, which is more or less a 0 gradient. It actually does have a very slight incline to it, I've noticed. But by doing this, you've cooled your traction motors back down again, and you've given yourself the ability to get a run up this 1.5 gradient. So let's see what happens this time. Remember, if we do make it past that 1.5, we're facing a 0.9, and with 400 tons, a 0.9 should be fairly sustainable. I reckon this DE2 can do 400 tons up a 1.1% gradient fairly consistently. That's my rough estimate. But we'll find out, because once we get past that 1.5, we'll see what happens. So again, I'm just going to try and punch it now. I want to get as much speed as I can. Just pushing the traction motor amps all the way. Backing off when the temp gets too high. I think somebody's actually written a mod that does this, by the way. I think they call it like DE2 cruise control or something. And all it basically does is it does this for you. It tries to keep the temperature maxed out and, you know, just deals with this. It says, well, if I hit this red or I hit this red, I'll back off. Otherwise, I'll just give it all the beans. But I prefer to do things manually. I like the fun. This to me is the challenge of the game, like getting the best out of things. We'll see. Okay, we've got 20k build up now. That's the original climb there coming out of the harbour. And that's the 1.5. We need to make it roughly around that bend. If we make it around that bend, we'll be onto the 0.9. We need a bit more speed than this, really. It's not quite as flat as it says it is on that gradient map. You can see we've flattened out now. We're actually picking up speed. But this is better than what we had when we made the top of this hill. There we go, 30k's. That's not too bad. Might just be enough to get us up here. So knowing what this locomotive can do in and out of the harbour, I think provides a good grounding for what, you know, whatever situation you find yourself in with a DE2. If you can relate it to what you did at the harbour like this, you can make a decision about whether you can haul that load or not. So this is the 1.5 proper now. That extra speed is definitely helping with the cooling. Because at the moment, we're sustaining slightly. I think that's trending into the red though. There we go. Well, hopefully that's enough momentum to get us over to the 0.9. When we get there, assuming we do, I'm going to test and see if we can actually sustain that. I think we will be able to, looking at this. This is almost sustainable. There's the red again. There's the sign for the gradient change. You're going to have to back off. Okay, so there you go. 0.9, I think that says. 0.5. Wait a minute. Oh, okay. Even better. I thought it was 0.9 up here. You can push things into the red a little bit, but not for very long. That reduction in speed has hurt our cooling. But I mean, this is pretty much on the limit of the DE2, you know? 360 metric tons of cargo coupled to a, what was that, a 38 ton locomotive, best part of 400. And that is basically your limit, more or less. You can deal with short sprints if you can get a run up at it. Long sustained climbs are the real killer. There are other options with the DE2, which I haven't shown in this video. You can get a second DE2. Now, there's two ways of running that. One way is the multi-unit way, where you've got your multi-unit license and you run the boat together via one locomotive. The other one, which I've actually done, and it's quite interesting, is where you don't link the DE2s together. You basically manually hop between one and the other one, and what you do is you use one like this to haul, and when it gets too hot, you jump in the other one, spool that one up, let this one cool down, and just keep jumping between them. It's quite amusing. It's if you've not got the multi-unit license, it's a really good option. If you have got the multi-unit license, well, you're better off just hooking them up. But it is a lot of fun. But anyway, as you can see, we're able to get out of here alive with the DE2. That's my kind of, you know, just rudimentary testing. There's nothing terribly scientific about this. The real point is 400 tons, it's doable. If you start loading on more than that, I think you're going to find that you can't really get away with things. Running up is really important. If you can take a big run up, it makes a huge difference. Luckily at the harbour, we can take a big run up, either from the south here or from the harbour itself. You can run up that hill. Going out east, forget about it. You could not haul this weight out of there. It's just a long, long climb with no opportunity for run up. And as you're in and around the map, you've got to think about this. For example, the steel mill, you can take a run up through the steel mill to make that climb. up at the food factory, there's a section here that's a bit of a slow climb. It's a 30 bend and then a steep gradient, so there's, you know, not a lot of opportunity for a run-up. But I would love to hear what your findings are. Like, are you doing testing on the DE2? What have you found? What have you managed to haul in Derail Valley Simulator? Let me know in the comments. Let's share the information and see what we can do. But that's it for this video, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. Please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Take care. Happy training.